Hey Reddit, I'm Madison Hayes, 22 years old, and I just pulled off the kind of revenge that makes people either cheer for you or call you insane. I don't even feel bad about it, not one bit. I grew up in Indiana, in a small suburban town where everyone knew everyone else's business. My dad, Daniel, was the heart of our family. He owned a small auto shop and taught me how to change oil before I could legally drive. I was his shadow, the shop kid, the one he'd brag about. Mom, Linda, was quieter but loving, and we were this close-knit little trio. Life was simple and happy until my dad died of a sudden heart attack when I was 12. It shattered us. Mom started working 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and cashiering at night, while I basically raised myself. I was the kid who did her own laundry, cooked dinner, and made honor roll without anyone checking my homework. I didn't resent Mom. I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She loved me, but grief hollowed her out. I spent years trying to make her proud, helping with chores, saving babysitting money to buy my own school clothes, and never asking for much. When I was 16, Tom appeared. Tom Campbell was this smooth-talking, mid-40s guy who drove a new F-150 and wore expensive boots that looked like they'd never seen dirt. He swept Mom off her feet with steakhouse dinners and flowers, and for a while she seemed alive again. But Tom didn't seem thrilled about me. He wasn't cruel outright, but every time I asked for help, rides to track practice, advice on applying for scholarships, he'd sigh dramatically and mutter things like, "You're old enough to figure it out." He never introduced me as his stepdaughter. I was always her kid. Still, I was 16, desperate for family. I'd watch sitcoms like Step by Step and Modern Family, and imagine a goofy, protective stepdad. Instead, I got a man who acted like I was an expense he didn't sign up for. He and Mom got married a year later, and I swallowed my disappointment because she looked so happy. Fast forward to me at 22. I just graduated from a local college with a communications degree, but job hunting in Indiana was rough. I was back at Mom and Tom's place, filling out endless applications and feeling like a burden. That's when Tom shocked me. One night he said, "I talked to a buddy of mine. He's looking for a receptionist at his marketing firm. You'd be perfect." I was stunned. This was the first time Tom had ever lifted a finger for me. I took the job, grateful and relieved, thinking maybe he'd warmed up to me after all these years. Tom suddenly became Mr. Father figure. He'd ask about work every evening, crack awkward dad jokes, and even made me pancakes before early shifts. Mom was thrilled, saying things like, "See, he's coming around." I let myself believe it. I was earning my own money, paying a small amount of rent, and finally feeling like things were looking up. 10 months into the job, I was proud of myself. I was always the first in and the last out, staying late to help with projects that weren't technically my responsibility. That's when I met Sarah. Sarah was 24, confident and hilarious. We clicked instantly, grabbing lunch together a few times a week. One day we were eating burritos in her car when she casually mentioned, "I'm finally getting ahead. With $46,000 a year, I can pay off my car early." I froze. I made $23,000. Same title, same hours, same responsibilities. I thought she was joking, but she pulled out her pay stub. It was legit. I showed her mine and she looked horrified. No. I started where you are. After 3 months, they bumped me because that's the standard rate," she said. That night I couldn't sleep. At first, I thought maybe I was being punished for being inexperienced. But something felt off. I emailed HR pretending I needed to update my direct deposit info. While digging, I found something that made my stomach drop. Half my salary, literally every paycheck, was being routed to an account under Tom's name. There it was, plain as day. It took everything in me not to scream. Tom hadn't been helping me. He'd cut a deal with my boss to pay me half the going rate and send the other half to him as some kind of finder's fee. For 10 months, I'd been busting my ass while Tom pocketed over $11,000. Suddenly, all his sudden fatherly affection made sense. The pancakes, the fake advice, the interest in my job, he was cashing in on me like I was a stock. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry to Mom. I didn't slam doors. No, I decided to burn his little empire down. For 2 weeks I acted clueless. I asked him for career advice to stroke his ego. At work, I started befriending people in accounting. Turns out, Tom had been doing this shady consulting gig for years. He had a whole side hustle of referring desperate new hires to companies, then skimming their pay. Nobody had questioned it because he was charismatic and helpful. I asked innocent questions, dropped a few compliments, and learned more than I expected. I spent a month gathering evidence. Bank statements, emails, HR logs, screenshots. I even found proof that he was siphoning money from Mom's savings for business trips that were really golf weekends in Kentucky. Then I went nuclear. I sent anonymous evidence packets to every company Tom worked with, exposing his finder's fee scam. I sent copies to Mom. I even sent a polite, detailed note to my boss, explaining that I'd found payroll discrepancies and would like to discuss them. By the end of the month, Tom was blacklisted from every consulting gig. My boss, horrified, called me into a meeting. He apologized profusely, offered me back pay, and promoted me to Sarah's pay grade immediately. HR was mortified. Apparently, Tom had told them I was his lazy niece he was helping out, which is why they didn't question the arrangement. Mom? She was devastated. She kicked Tom out the night she saw his bank statements. He drained $15,000 from her savings. Tom tried to spin it, calling me ungrateful and vindictive. He sent me paragraphs about how I'd ruined his life. I replied with one word: mahalo. Mom and I used some of my back pay to take a vacation to Hawaii. I don't regret a thing. Tom thought I was weak. Turns out, I inherited more of my dad's grit than he realized. A week after the Hawaii trip, I was back at Mom's place, sitting at the kitchen counter scrolling through emails, when the pounding on the front door started. It was the kind of pounding that makes your stomach drop, heavy and insistent, like whoever's on the other side has already decided they're not leaving without a scene. Mom froze mid-step, a dish towel in her hand, and whispered, "It's him." She didn't need to say his name. Tom's temper was a thing you could feel through walls. He was on the porch, red-faced, sweat dripping down his temple despite the cool Indiana evening, hammering his fists against the door. He shouted about betrayal, about how we had humiliated him in front of his business associates, and how family was supposed to be loyal. I could see him through the side window, pacing like a caged animal, his boots thudding against the wooden boards. Mom told him to leave or she'd call the police, and he snarled something about us regretting this, about how I'd never make it in life without him. His voice carried down the street, and I knew half the neighborhood was listening through their curtains. Eventually he stormed off, slamming the gate behind him so hard it rattled. The sound of his truck revving down the street was strangely satisfying, but that night neither of us slept well. Mom double-checked the locks twice, and I left the porch light on, its glow casting long shadows across the lawn. It was the first time I realized Tom wasn't just angry. He was humiliated, and humiliation makes people dangerous. Over the next few days, stories started trickling in. A friend from high school, now working at a local hardware store, told me Tom had come in looking for day labor gigs, trying to sell his expensive golf clubs for cash. Someone else spotted him at the gas station, sitting in his truck on the phone, gesturing wildly. The shine he'd always carried, that air of superiority he used to wear like cologne, was gone. Then Mom got a call from a mutual acquaintance who worked at a nearby company Tom had done consulting for. Word of his scam had spread like wildfire. Not only had he been fired from every side gig he had, but he was also being quietly blacklisted. In small towns, reputations are currency, and Tom had bankrupted himself overnight. He'd built his whole persona on connections and influence, but those same connections now saw him as a liability. He started couchsurfing, staying with some guy he used to golf with. I heard this from Sarah, my coworker, who seemed almost gleeful delivering the gossip. Apparently, Tom had been bragging about his investments in his stepdaughter's career just months ago, spinning a narrative that he was this selfless father figure giving me a shot. Now people were whispering about how he'd pocketed thousands off me, how he drained Mom's savings, how he'd been caught fabricating business expenses for trips that were really weekend getaways. At work, my promotion had settled in and I was thriving. But outside the office, the aftermath of Tom's implosion felt like a ripple effect through the whole town. A local diner server told me Tom had been in, looking rough, his once perfectly ironed shirts wrinkled, his beard patchy, staring into his coffee cup like it might solve his problems. He'd always been a man obsessed with appearances, his truck washed twice a week, his boots polished, his Instagram full of carefully staged photos of bourbon glasses and steak dinners. Now he was a man people whispered about, a cautionary tale. Mom filed for divorce officially, and I went with her to the lawyer's office. The lawyer, a sharp older woman with no patience for nonsense, told us Tom had already tried to shift some assets into a friend's name, but she'd seen this game before. He wasn't going to get away with it. Watching Mom regain her confidence was one of the few bright spots in all of this. She'd spent years feeling like Tom was her safety net, like she needed him because he made more money and knew how the world worked. Now she saw him for what he was, a man who'd been stealing from us both while pretending to be our protector. The weirdest part was how quickly his downfall became entertainment for the locals. Small-town gossip is relentless. A cashier at the grocery store asked Mom if she'd heard about Tom's truck. Turns out he'd missed payments and it had been repossessed. A bartender told Sarah that Tom had been in asking about bartending shifts, something he would have once considered beneath him. Everyone had a story, a sighting, a tidbit. It was like watching a fallen king try to scavenge scraps in the kingdom he used to rule. Mom blocked his number, but I didn't. I wanted to see his attempts at manipulation firsthand. He sent long, rambling messages about how I'd ruined his life, how I'd never survive in the real world without his connections, how I owed him gratitude for investing in my career. I didn't respond to any of them. Silence felt louder than anything I could have said. The last time I physically saw him was in the Walmart parking lot a few weeks later. I was loading groceries into my car when I noticed a beat-up sedan parked across the lot. Tom was sitting inside, looking smaller somehow, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. He didn't notice me, or maybe he did and couldn't bring himself to approach. For a second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered every condescending sigh, every dollar he stole, every way he made Mom feel like she was lucky to have him. And I shut the trunk and drove away without a second glance. He's become a ghost now, a cautionary whisper in town. The man who thought he was untouchable is now struggling to pick up odd jobs just to get by. And me? I'm thriving. My back pay has funded my marketing certification courses, I'm climbing the ladder at work, and Mom's happier than I've seen her in years. The people who used to fawn over Tom now avoid him, embarrassed they ever trusted him. Word spreads fast in small communities. It was surreal how quickly everything had flipped after months of chaos. Just weeks before, I'd been dragging myself through the office like a ghost, watching Tom strut around with that smug grin, knowing he'd orchestrated every bit of my humiliation. He had me pegged as disposable, just another pawn to throw under the bus while he played puppet master. For months I kept my head down, documenting everything, all while quietly pulling strings. I'd been terrified the entire time, but once the truth came out, it was like ripping the lid off a pressure cooker. The fallout had been brutal. Tom didn't just get fired, he got escorted out. His office was cleared in under an hour. HR moved faster than I'd ever seen them move, and rumors spread like wildfire. People whispered about investigators, about fraud, about how deep the rabbit hole went. Tom's inner circle started crumbling almost immediately. The people who'd spent months laughing behind my back and parroting his every order suddenly couldn't look me in the eye. His right-hand guy, Brian, vanished within a week, allegedly quitting for family reasons. Though everyone knew he was jumping ship before his name got tied to Tom's schemes. Sarah and I became something of a cautionary tale in the office. She'd been my rock through the entire ordeal. The one person who believed me when I said something wasn't right. Watching Tom go down was vindicating for both of us, but it also created a strange kind of tension in the office. People started avoiding us not out of dislike, but because we'd seen too much. It was like we'd stepped out of the normal office ecosystem and become something else entirely. Then came the surprise twist. I was summoned to the new boss's office. I expected a polite dismissal, or at best, a lukewarm thanks for your hard work. Instead, I got an apology that felt so sincere it disarmed me completely. He explained that when he'd first taken over, Tom had managed to spin a narrative that made the fraudulent practices sound like company policy. It wasn't until Sarah and I raised alarms that he realized how deep the deception went. The guilt in his voice was genuine. He admitted he'd been fooled, that he'd failed to protect his employees, and that he wanted to make things right. The lunch meeting that followed felt surreal. The restaurant was too nice, the kind of place I'd never have chosen for myself, and there I was sitting across from the man who now ran the entire department, listening as he broke down just how messy things had been. Tom had been siphoning resources, fudging numbers, even using employee evaluations as leverage to silence people. The higher-ups were horrified when they learned how bad it had gotten, and apparently my quiet documentation had been a key factor in exposing him. When he offered me a $5,000 bonus, I nearly dropped my fork. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was the recognition. For months, I'd been gaslit and humiliated, and now someone was finally acknowledging what I'd endured. Then came the kicker. He wanted me to step into a new role. Not a huge promotion, but a start. Junior project coordinator. A fresh slate. The first day in my new role felt like stepping into an alternate reality. My desk was relocated to a brighter corner, and my workload shifted from mind-numbing administrative tasks to actual project coordination. I suddenly had a seat at meetings I'd never been invited to before. People started asking for my input, treating me like my opinions had value. The same colleagues who'd once dismissed me as Tom's scapegoat now watched me with quiet respect. Tom, meanwhile, became a ghost story. There were whispers he was couchsurfing at a friend's place after losing his condo. Someone claimed he'd been blacklisted from several companies in the industry. Another person swore they saw him working part-time at a local car dealership. I didn't feel sorry for him. Not after the hell he'd put me through. Karma had finally caught up. The shift in office dynamics was dramatic. Sarah and I, once outsiders, became something of a legend. People started coming to us with their own grievances, seeking advice or solidarity. It was strange, being seen as some kind of avenger when all I'd done was refuse to be silenced. Sarah leaned into it, teasing me relentlessly and telling everyone I was the office's very own vigilante. I started noticing changes in myself too. The constant anxiety that had haunted me for months began to fade. I was no longer waiting for the next knife in the back. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. I was good at this new role, really good. My organizational skills, which Tom had mocked as overkill, turned out to be exactly what this position needed. There were days I'd catch myself staring at my computer screen, remembering how powerless I'd felt just months earlier, and I'd feel this quiet, simmering pride. Not only had I survived, but I'd taken part in toppling a toxic system. That feeling was worth more than the bonus or the title. It was validation that I wasn't crazy, that my instincts had been right all along. Even with the dust settling, there were occasional reminders of the chaos we'd endured. I'd overhear whispers when new hires asked about Tom, or when someone stumbled across an old email thread that carried his name. The memory of his reign lingered like a bad smell, but it didn't scare me anymore. If anything, it fueled me. The department began to thrive under new leadership. Projects that had been languishing under Tom's mismanagement were suddenly moving forward, and morale improved drastically. People seemed lighter, more collaborative, like they'd finally been allowed to breathe. And in that new atmosphere, I found myself growing, learning, and stepping into a version of myself I hadn't thought possible when this all started. Now, Sarah jokes about it constantly, calling me the Avenger like I'm some office superhero. I laugh it off, but deep down I know there's some truth to it. I fought back when I was supposed to crumble, and I came out stronger for it. I am now a junior project coordinator, and Sarah jokingly calls me the Avenger. Life settled into something that almost felt like peace after years of living in a constant state of tension. The house felt lighter without Tom's presence, like someone had finally opened a window after years of stale air. Mom started smiling again, really smiling, not the tight-lipped, forced expression she used to put on to keep him calm. She had more energy, more life in her. Even the way she moved around the kitchen was different, free, unhurried, like she wasn't afraid of setting him off by making too much noise. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't waking up with that sinking feeling in my stomach, wondering what kind of mood he'd be in that day. The nights were quieter too. No more slammed doors, no passive-aggressive comments over dinner, no muttered insults he thought I couldn't hear. It was like we'd both been holding our breath for years and finally got to exhale. Getting my back pay was a game changer. I'd worked so hard at that job, only to watch Tom drain every penny we had, and now I finally had something to show for it. Enrolling in night classes felt like planting a flag in the ground, a statement that I wasn't going to let the years he stole from us define me. Walking into that classroom for the first time was surreal. I'd been out of school long enough that I worried I wouldn't fit in, but instead I found myself thriving. Marketing turned out to be something I had a knack for. I loved the psychology behind it, understanding why people made decisions and how to reach them. The late nights were worth it, every single one, because for the first time I was doing something for me. Mom became my biggest cheerleader. She'd wait up for me after class sometimes, a cup of tea in hand, and we'd sit at the kitchen table talking about everything and nothing. It wasn't the kind of relationship we'd had when I was a teenager, when everything felt like walking on eggshells. We'd become a team, a family that had survived the storm together. She confessed things to me I'd never known, like how she'd been secretly saving cash for months before she kicked Tom out, planning her escape while keeping up the facade that everything was fine. It made me respect her even more, realizing she hadn't just endured him, she'd outsmarted him. And Tom was unraveling. Word traveled fast in a small town, and his downfall became the kind of gossip people whispered about in line at the grocery store. His truck getting repossessed was just the beginning. He'd burned so many bridges that no one wanted to hire him, and the only work he could find was off the books, hauling bricks and lumber for cash. I'd see him sometimes standing in the parking lot of a gas station or walking down Main Street, and he looked like a ghost of himself. The arrogance was gone, replaced with a kind of bitterness that clung to him like a shadow. There was a part of me, a small part, that expected to feel sorry for him, but I didn't. I remembered every time he mocked me for being too soft, every time he dismissed my ambitions, every sneer when I came home late from work or school. He made me feel worthless, like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. Seeing him finally stripped of the power he lorded over us felt like justice. Karma wasn't subtle, it was ruthless. I threw myself into building a future, and it felt good to be busy. Between work and school, I barely had time to think about the past, but when I did, it was with a sense of triumph rather than pain. The house got a makeover too. Mom and I repainted the living room, fixed the squeaky cabinet doors, and even bought new furniture. It was symbolic in a way, removing the stains of Tom's presence one piece at a time. The house wasn't haunted anymore. It felt like home. I started making new friends in my classes, and for the first time I felt like I had a community. People who didn't know me as the girl with the controlling stepdad, but as someone capable, someone interesting. My confidence grew with every passing week. I started volunteering at events, picking up side gigs in marketing, building a portfolio that would eventually lead to a real career. Tom, on the other hand, became nothing more than a cautionary tale. His name would come up in passing conversations, always accompanied by a shake of the head or a comment about how quickly he'd fallen. He'd gone from someone who strutted around town like he owned the place to someone people pitied. A man who lost everything because of his own arrogance. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a part of me that enjoyed hearing about his misfortune. It wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about closure. Seeing him lose the things he valued most, status, possessions, control, felt like balance being restored. He had underestimated me for so long, treated me like a burden, and now he was the one living in survival mode. It was poetic, really. One night, while studying for an exam, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. I thought about 16-year-old me, sitting in my bedroom with headphones in, trying to drown out the chaos in the next room. Back then I'd fantasized about running away, about escaping and never looking back. I couldn't have imagined that one day I'd be sitting in a quiet house, sipping tea with my mom, planning my future, and laughing about how far we'd come. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We weren't scared anymore. Tom's shadow didn't hang over us. And every time I thought about him, standing on some dusty construction site in worn-out boots, I felt a sense of justice so sharp it was almost sweet. Watching him lose everything was better than any sitcom ending I'd imagined when I was 16.